We hope you enjoy this audio-only podcast. You can watch the full video versions on our YouTube channel at All Things Unexplained. There we share visuals, documents, and extended discussions you won't hear anywhere else. While you're there, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a new video. Plus, if you subscribe and comment on a video, that will enter you into our giveaways. But for now, enjoy this audio version of All Things Unexplained.
All Things Unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, will save for closed session.
All right, Unexplained Ones, it's Dr. Melton. Welcome back to All Things Unexplained. What if I were to tell you that there's a new paper out there that could show transients on observatory plates from the 1950s are actually UFOs? Well, a new paper by Ivo Busco could be pushing in that direction, and interestingly, it aligns with earlier work by Dr. Beatrice Villarroel and Dr. Stephen Bruehl, who you may remember from his appearance on All Things Unexplained. But first, remember the best way you can support the show is by grabbing that subscribe button and commenting on the videos. Plus, that will enter you into a chance for our giveaways, and we'll get into that more at the end of the video. And now, before we go any further, here's a quick refresher from Dr. Bruehl himself explaining the idea of transients, mysterious objects that appeared on old sky survey plates and then vanished.
Sure. So it's a study. It was just published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal called Scientific Reports, which is a serious, widely read general science journal. And I did it with my collaborator, who's Beatrice Villarroel, who's with the Nordic Institute of Theoretical Physics in Stockholm. And this is not my thing. She came up with this idea, but she, early in her career, realized that all these observatories had old photographic plates that had been taken back prior to there being any satellites in the sky, from about 1949 to 1957, and that in many cases there were a series of images taken sometimes over pretty short periods, so you could look at changes over time. And she got into looking at these and discovered something that she called transients. And basically what it is you look at a photograph and you've got an image that shows all the stars you expect to see. And 30 minutes later, you take another image and there seems to be an extra star or several extra stars, and it just points. It looks exactly like stars. And then weeks, months, years later, you take multiple images again, and those extra things are gone. So it's literally a single photographic plate that these things that look exactly like extra stars appear, and then they disappear. And she noticed, just coincidentally, that two instances where multiple very bright transients appeared fell on the same dates as the well-known Washington, D.C. UFO sightings back in 1952. And this is an example of one of the images of that first weekend. And if you look on the right, that's what the sky normally looks like. And on the left, those three extra stars in the center, those are the transients. So these were very bright and they were clustered together. And given that it happened on that DC weekend, she began wondering, gee, I wonder if maybe what we captured here was the UAP in space. And I heard her speak about this, and I didn't know her at all, and I didn't know how famous she was, but I wrote her an email and said, hey, that's pretty interesting. I wonder if what would happen if we looked systematically at your transients and how they were associated with UAP sightings more broadly. And we did a Zoom, and she's very collaborative and said, sure, we should do that. So we started working on it together from a distance because she's in Stockholm. And in the process of putting together the data set that had the transient data and UAP data from it's called UFO CAT, from the Center for UFO Studies. It's got several 100,000 UAP sightings. I remembered a book I'd read called UFOs and Nukes by Robert Hastings, where there were
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great book. Many anecdotal reports of people who were working on nuclear tests that said they saw UAP either right before, during, or right after nuclear tests. So I decided to pull in the dates of all of those above ground nuclear tests that we did, the Soviets did, and the British did between 1949 and 57. And so we had basically three things. We had, did a transient occur? And if so, how many were there on that day? And then what were there UAP sightings that day? And if so, how many? And was there a nuclear test that day? And we had about 2,700 days in our data set with all this information. And we were going to wait originally to have AI applied to it to try to clean up the transient data, because we know that there are some erroneous identifications that this computerized system that detected them made. But I got tired of waiting for the AI, and one weekend I pulled out my statistics program and looked at this just to see if there was any hint of a relationship. And honestly, I was shocked, because what we found was that on what we call a nuclear window, which is plus or minus 1 day around a nuclear test, there was a 45% increase in the chances of seeing a transient, which is quite a bit. And it was highly significant statistically. There was 8 chances out of 1,000 that that was an error. And that's the main focus of the paper. And the other finding related to that that was more interesting is, after we sent it into the journal to be reviewed by other scientists, one of them came back and said, you need to look in more detail at the exact timing of this. Don't just look at a window. And I started looking 2 days before a test, 1 day before a nuclear test, same day, 1 day after, and 2 days after. And it was really amazing, because it turned out that most of the effect came because there was a transient more likely to appear the day after a nuclear test. And it was actually a 68% increase in likelihood of seeing a transient, which is a big number.
Wow.
And it's really it's the difference between on days without nuclear tests, there was about 11% of days there was at least one transient. But if there'd been a nuclear test, there was almost 19% of the days had a transient. So it was a really big increase. And that's what the paper's about. And, it has a lot of interesting implications.
So what Dr. Villarroel and Dr. Bruehl found was striking. These objects appeared suddenly. They did not match known satellites or aircraft. Now, in some cases, they could correlate with human activity like nuclear testing. But now enter Busco's newer work, which builds on these ideas, suggesting that these phenomena may not just be random anomalies, but part of a broader, possibly physical system that we don't yet understand. And that's where things get really interesting. Plus, quite key here to all this is the fact that Busco's paper used plates from a different observatory than the Villarroel-Bruehl paper. Of course, the Villarroel-Bruehl paper used plates from the Palomar Observatory in California. And one of the weaknesses of the paper is the fact that all the data is from that one observatory. So we've been waiting for someone else to come along and potentially gather data from another observatory during that time frame that they looked at. And now along comes Ivo Busco, and he's looking at data from the plates in the Hamburg, Germany observatory. And those plates also show photographs where in one particular section of the sky, we see what appears to be a star, but then 2, sometimes even 3 photographs later of the same section of sky within a very close time period, one of the stars disappears. It's gone. And now that we have plates from a different observatory during that same time frame as Villarroel and Bruehl were looking at, and they studied transient data from the Palomar Observatory in California from November 19th, 1949 to April 28th, 1957. And this is where I want to introduce an individual UFO case, a long forgotten case from December 1956. So for this case study, We're looking at December 17th, 1956, an incident near Japan. So we're going back to the Cold War here, the same time period as the Transient papers looked at. 2 U.S. Air Force F-86D jet pilots are running a training exercise, practicing radar-guided intercepts somewhere in the Far East near Japan. Now, this was the type of mission that was routine, controlled, and predictable until things went quite awry. During one intercept run, one of the pilots suddenly picked up something unexpected, a large radar return, about 20 miles away, approximately 30 degrees off his position. The pilot contacted Ground Control Intercept and asked them, "Do you have a target here?" The answer came back, "No, nothing on the radar." The pilot requested permission to investigate the object, and they accelerated to over 700 miles per hour, closing the distance quickly. At about 8 miles out, the pilot sees the object. The pilot saw the object exactly where his radar said it would be. We're talking about a solid object, which the pilot later described like this: about the size of a pencil eraser held against the windscreen. Now, using aircraft data, analysts later estimated that this would be approximately 350 feet in diameter. That's certainly much larger than a B-29 bomber. As a matter of fact, we're talking 3.5 football fields in diameter. And then things with this UFO encounter escalated. The pilot achieved a radar lock-on. In other words, the system was now actively tracking and guiding toward the object. But suddenly, there was strong interference that hit the radar system and the pilot's radar, and the signal began to jam. The pilot switched frequency, which was apparently standard anti-jam procedure, and indeed, for about 10 seconds, the interference disappeared. And then it came back. At the pilot's closest approach, about 5 nautical miles, they observed a circular object, flat on the bottom, possibly dome-shaped on top, and a golden tan color with no visible reflection from the sunlight. This was a daylight encounter by the pilot, and then the object moved. This UFO began a shallow turn and then accelerated. The estimated speed of this encounter was 1,500 to 1,800 knots. That's roughly 1,700 to over 2,000 miles per hour, faster than a jet and faster than the radar could reliably track the object. The radar operator noted it disappeared right off the top of the scope. Vanished, gone. Now, once the pilot returned, the aircraft was immediately inspected, and the radar systems were found to be perfectly functioning. All other systems found to be normal. The pilot was an experienced, credible pilot, and he was even reluctant to report what he saw. In the official notes, he observed he would have doubted the event himself if he hadn't witnessed it. Here's where this individual case study could tie back to the transient research we were talking about. This UFO encounter wasn't just a light in the sky. It wasn't just a distant sighting of something. It wasn't just a vague anecdote. No, this UFO encounter was radar plus visual confirmation. It involved electronic interference or jamming. It was in a controlled military environment, and it involved a highly trained observer. It's also important to note that there was no corresponding ground radar track of this object, but the fact is that the ground radar required a system IFF, that's identification friend or foe, to even register an aircraft. So if this IFF wasn't involved, which by the way, we would not expect to be involved with a UFO, a UAP, then that definitely means this object could have been there and just wasn't showing up on the ground radar track. All right, so now let's take a step back. Dr. Villarroel and Dr. Bruehl identified physical transient objects appearing and disappearing. Ivo Busco suggests there could be a broader pattern or mechanism at play here. And now looking back into the UFO archives, here we have a case study from 1956 involving a huge object estimated to be 350 feet wide, 3.5 football fields in diameter. In 1956. I mean, that's hard to fathom even now, much less in 1956. It was interacting with the pilot's radar. It exhibited intelligent and controlled movement. It was capable of electronic interference. It changed direction, evaded the pilot, and escaped at tremendous speeds. I would dare say that's not just a UFO encounter. That's a UFO interaction. In closing, if these events are connected, if even a fraction of them are, then we're not just dealing with isolated anomalies. We're not just dealing with dust particles on observatory plates or defects caused by above ground nuclear testing, which, by the way, from one of the transient images in the Busco paper, dated December 3rd, 1956, there are no nuclear tests on record on that date. So could we be looking at a system of objects or phenomena that appear, interact, and disappear, governed by rules that we're only beginning to detect and understand? And if so, that raises another question. Are we observing something external or something that's been here all along, just outside our ability to measure? Remember, if you hit the subscribe button and comment on the video, that will enter you into our giveaways. We've got a lot of great things, including signed swag by author Bev Vincent from the Stephen King multiverse. I've got some signed books here by David Koenig, who will be on All Things Unexplained soon to discuss Disney mysteries. We've got some signed books like Preparing to Survive in the Age of Collapse by Colonel Drew Miller, who's been on All Things Unexplained. And we've got some signed Patricia Cornwell books. Don't forget that All Things Unexplained is in New York Times bestselling author Patricia Cornwell's Identity Unknown. So check us out on page 164. And I'll do a little blatant self-promotion here. I've got a new children's book coming out in the fall. It's called The Legend of Squatchy Hollow, a tale of the Jacko Squatch. And you can see that right here. Here's a copy, an early copy. Here's a look at the inside. So a little Halloween tale there involving Bigfoots for your kiddos. That will be available on Amazon by the fall. And don't forget, I've got another book called Voices in the Shadows that will be out by Schiffer Publishing sometime in 2026. But for now, let's get off our devices for a little while. Let's head out into the woods. Let's look up at the sky some tonight. You may not spot a Bigfoot. You may not spot a UFO, but you might just find something even more important out there, and that's yourself. Thanks, everybody.
All Things Unexplained.
So some of that I think, sir, will save for closed session.